Is your job search stuck? Maybe you're not getting any interviews with employers. Or maybe you are, but no job offers. Or you may be new and not even know where to start. This is Charles Max Wood, and I'm releasing a new course and ebook on how to find a job as a software developer. The course walks you through the process of finding the types of companies you want to work for, getting their attention, and putting your best foot forward as the candidate they want. I've coached dozens of developers in looking for jobs and have been able to help several people find jobs within 2 weeks to 2 months. So whether you're new to development, can't find a great job that fits what you want, or looking for remote work from an area without a strong tech community, I can help. Go to getacoderjob.com and sign up today. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Elixir Mixed. This week on our panel we have Mark Ericksen. Hey friends. Josh Adams.
Ahoy.
Eric Berry.
Hey everybody.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that is Brooklyn Zelenka.
Hi.
Do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Yeah, sure. So, polyglot programmer, these days mostly working in blockchain R&D, but I've written a number of Elixir libraries, including Exceptional, Quark, LG, Witchcraft, and Typeclass.
So just a few, huh?
Just a few. There's a few more. Those are the big ones.
Nice. Well, we brought you on to talk about Exceptional. Do you want to just give us a quick elevator pitch for that library?
Sure. So Exceptional makes error handling easy in Elixir and lets you help think in terms of flow as opposed to checking for errors and threading state through.
So what's wrong with the regular Elixir exception implementation?
Yeah. So there's a few things. So it really came out of pain with using an older Erlang library that didn't completely document all of its error states, all the different tuples that could come out of it. So when doing pattern matching, you would get one of 6 or 7 different things. And there were cases that would just blow up randomly. So we ended up having to, wrap this, check, and, go along that way. And then there's the part where you have to always, even if you do it in a with block, right, you end up having to pull out, pattern match out what you think you're going to get, and then thread that into the next step. What Exceptional lets you do is just, you replace the pipe operator with, tilde angle bracket, squiggly arrow, and you can just pretend that you're on the happy path. And then at the end of this, or really at any step, but usually at the end, you can check for which error state you wound up in, as opposed to raising an error where everything blows up and you unwind the entire stack. It gives you control and lets you pass back if you want to the caller to decide what to do with the error, or to recontextualize the error from a small local state to this is where this is happening. So you get more information back. It's all happening with error or exception structs, just as comes out of the box in Elixir. And then you can add all the information that you want to that, extra context, and even use that lovely plug status key as well to get the right error code in a plug application.
So what you're saying is you're making Elixir exceptions more accessible to the developer themselves.
Yes, yeah. More accessible, more contextual, and following some more functional, traditional functional styles.
You built this 2 years ago. What's the adoption been like?
So I hear from people, this is probably the one that people use the most. I don't have, exact numbers, but whenever I'm at a conference or even, a couple times a year or maybe 5-6 times a year, I'll get an email about it saying, thank you, this really saved my project for this and that reason. So I don't think obviously it's not in every project. It doesn't ship with it automatically, but people seem to really be enjoying it.
So 2 years ago in the Elixir world seems like a lifetime in most other languages. How long have you been developing in Elixir?
In Elixir since 2014 and Erlang since 2011, 2012, somewhere there.
Wow. What were you doing before that?
So, really only started programming in 2011. But
so you, right out of the gate, you hopped on the Elixir Erlang bandwagon.
Yeah. So, obviously first language was JavaScript, and then quickly had to pick up just because of the company I was working at, Clojure and Groovy and a bunch of JVM languages, and was introduced to this crazy Haskell idea. So I picked up Haskell and then learned to use some Erlang, read that book, kind of liked the model, and sort of started collecting languages and really fell in love with functional programming generally. and picking up, the lambda calculus and, all these different things. And so, I ended up doing a little bit of Erlang, mostly on the side. And then in Vancouver, there's a huge Ruby community, and there's all those, Ruby refugees looking for something new. And, there was an opportunity to use more Elixir. So.
Right. Yeah. Speaking as a Ruby refugee, I love that you call it that. There seems to be a pretty large migration from Ruby onto Elixir. Have you played with Ruby at all? What's your experience in that?
Yeah, I did Ruby full time for a couple of years. Mostly Rails applications, not entirely. Yeah, I do find it interesting that there's such an interest in Elixir from the Ruby community, because there's such different languages aside from the top level syntax, which obviously there's influence, right? And the aesthetic is similar, but the way you end up having to think and the way the language is structured and the ecosystem, et cetera, is just completely separate. But there's this cultural component that is the same, that we've really been able to port over, which was probably the biggest strength in Ruby, was the community is fantastic, right? And having that, really strong leadership, up in the core team, a lot of them coming from the Rails core group, right? Making it very friendly, very accessible, not adding features just for the heck of having features, making everything very practical and accessible.
So not having like 3 or 4 different alias methods for the same method is what you're saying. I feel like I should write it this way, so let's make that okay. And I feel like I should write it this way, so let's make that okay. And there's beauty to that, though. I mean, I've been developing Elixir for a little bit now, and I find myself always wanting to go back to Ruby. The problem with that is that Ruby doesn't solve some of the issues that more modern day problems display. The fact that you've been doing Elixir since 2014 is just insane. You're so far ahead of the game. And you're an open source contributor, so I'm a big fan of yours. I know we're going to talk about Exceptional, but do you mind if we just branch into some of the other projects that you've built and maybe why you've built them?
Sure, yeah. So the absolute first library that I wrote in Elixir, I guess we'll just mostly scope this to Elixir, was Quark. So I run the functional programming meetup in Vancouver, and people were interested in learning some of the really classic 1940s foundations, and there was a lot of interest in Elixir as well. So I said, well, let's see if I can port some of this stuff in, just handful of things, SNK combinators, like the absolute classics. And it ended up growing and added more and more stuff like auto currying and partial functions. And Elixir is very much an arity-based language. So this, really breaks the mold for that, but then it also makes functions very reusable. So that ended up getting some adoption in libraries, less in applications, right? But in libraries where things have to be very, very reusable, which is really the point of those techniques. And then I just ended up having both, for reasons of hobby and then wanting to, missing idioms, especially from Haskell when doing Phoenix work in production. There were a few of us that had similar background that were working in Elixir at a consulting company I was at a few years ago. And so we were missing things like type classes and functors and monads and all of that stuff. So I took a crack at writing Witchcraft, which then necessitated all of these other libraries to sort of bootstrap up into even being able to do that, right? So type class sort of papers over the protocols in Elixir. So right now with enum, you need to implement enumerable, right? But that means that I have to know that the enumerable protocol exists. So all that type class does, it does 2 things. One, it lets you share the name. So you can say, these are the functions that you need to implement. And here's all the functions that you'll get back out of this module at the end. So it lets you share the namespace, and then behind the scenes, it creates a protocol for you, and then you can, the implementation gets routed to the right place and all of that. And it does compile time property checks on the function that you have to define to make sure that it will behave correctly the way that you want it to. Unfortunately, that means that there's in development, there's a compile time overhead to that, but it just runs once and then that's all good. So there's that, Witchcraft, Algae, which brings in all of the data structures that work well with this style. And there's one more. Oh yeah, and then Quark, which we already talked about. Yeah. And so people have been using that to learn without having to go and learn Haskell or Idris or Scala, to learn these techniques and these ideas, and then to be able to use these idioms in Elixir, even though it's not it's not an ML, right? It's a very, very different language from, say, Haskell, but there's the type system isn't as strong. It's not as expressive at the type level. But if you're willing to be the type checker yourself, then you can still use it.
And so I was going to say partial functions and auto currying are two things that I really wish we could have kind of at the language level. They're the two things I miss the most when I'm writing Elixir, which is all the time. But yeah, so thank you for those. I've played with, but not used Quark in production.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah. No, there's a lot of stuff in there that I would love to see in the standard library. It's partly a question too of how, because these are all general purpose languages, right? You should be able to write anything in any of them. As soon as it ends up in the standard library, we're basically saying this is blessed as being standard, right? So at what point do we say this is the style, the default style, as opposed to another style in Elixir? And I actually gave my keynote at MPEX this year was exactly about this of, should we be porting in other ideas? I think that this is a good idea. It does mean that there's a higher burden of number of concepts and things to learn, which is already a fair number of things, people coming from an object-oriented background into a functional paradigm. But I really think that Elixir hits this nice point in the design space or in the language space of being friendly, as long as we do it in a way that feels Elixir-y, that aesthetic, again, I think it could be very successful as a way of bringing in other concepts. I've brought in all of these really classic functional programming concepts. There's no reason that you couldn't model an object-oriented style with class inheritance and the whole 9 yards. You could do it. There's nothing stopping you, right? Because macros. So
let's talk exceptions.
Okay.
Now, your library, you built this quick TLDR in the library. You built it in order to, it says here in the blog post, it's an Elixir library for providing helpers and working with exceptions. It aims to make working with plain old unwrapped Elixir values more convenient and to give full control back to calling functions. What's the adoption? I know we talked a little bit about this already. I apologize, but you said you've been getting good feedback on it. It's been slowly adopted. Any chance that it might become part of core?
I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing it as part of core. Since this was written, they've moved more in the direction of those with blocks, with the manual threading through. I mean, it's possible. For a while there, I don't think it is anymore, but for a while there, it was the second most downloaded error handling library on Hex, behind, I think it was OK, the OK library. Which also does a similar sort of error handling. They were doing it more with tuples, and we were using exception structs. So obviously there's an interest in using that style. Looking at the trajectory of the standard library exceptional handling style over the last few years, it really looks like they're aiming at being compatible with the traditional Erlang ecosystem, right? Using tuples for everything, which are very lightweight, very fast, which is nice, but you can end up in these sort of sticky situations. And it was almost a little bit surprising that became the focus because they introduced this struct style with Elixir, right? As, I think the website used to say something like, modern style of error handling. The problem with using that, and especially with arrays, is you lose the context and control. You can still catch, throw and catch basically, or raise and I can't remember the block you stick around that because I keep using exceptional. But you lose some control and use some context. This could be coming from anywhere in the AST, anywhere in the tree below, right? I would love to see it as part of the standard library as an alternative style, but now we're going to have two alternate styles for this, and you'll have to interop with either of them. Yeah, so it really depends on the culture and the way that we end up going.
I have more questions, but I've been dominating the questions so far. Any other questions around the exceptional or exceptions or the libraries that we've talked about? If not, I want to kind of veer the topic in a different direction. Let's veer. Okay, so I've read a little bit about you, and as I understand, you're currently you're the lead engineer for FinHaven, right?
I was until June, yes. So now I'm, so still in the blockchain space. I have my own company, Robot Overlord, and just very recently incorporated an American company as well, SPADE, Special Projects in Decentralized Engineering.
So first off, kudos on Robot Overlords. That is the most badass name I've ever heard.
Thanks.
And congratulations on starting that up. Let's talk about the blockchain a little bit. I'd like to know, where does blockchain and Elixir or Erlang, where do those meet?
So blockchain, so where do they meet? There's a few places. Obviously, the Beam is very well suited to doing distributed computing, right? Which is the fundamental problem that the blockchain is trying to solve, right? By distributing both the abstracting away where the program is run and decentralizing authority as well, so that you don't have a single central database. We can all agree on how things will work, and it's in a lot of ways very nice to not have to always worry about things like partition tolerance and all of that stuff, because everybody has a copy. And if you're on an out-of-date partition, you'll just as part of the system, you will just become up to date. So there's obviously a lot of crossover. A lot of the work actually that I'm doing now on the blockchain, especially in the with Ethereum, is bringing in idioms from Elixir and Akka and Haskell and et cetera into those systems. So you may notice a thread here with my side projects, porting things.
Oh, yeah.
So right now so not all blockchains are like this. There are some that are truly multi-threaded, right? But you can really treat Ethereum as a single-threaded machine copied many times, right? And you have a bunch of programs sitting on there that can talk to each other. You have a decentralization of control of each of these, and they need to be able to talk to each other. The state of the art right now is to return a Boolean if you've succeeded or failed, or to just blow up the entire transaction. Everything's essentially in a transaction block, right? One of the standards that I'm working on right now, it's actually what I'm doing full time for the next few months at least, is called Ethereum status codes. And it's basically tagged tuples, so kind of, like OK and error, on Ethereum. So it's about halfway between tagged tuples on the Beam and HTTP. There's a protocol layer as well. So there's that as an overlap. And then there's a number of people there's an implementation of Ethereum and a few other systems. In Elixir, there's a few. I was just in Berlin for the Council of Ethereum Magicians, which is the conference out there, and ran into a few Elixir people there as well that are building their system on Elixir. And with all the interest in just increasing interest in distributed systems and cryptography, people have been doing implementations of things like Raft and other ways of doing ConsenSys, which is really exciting. I also think it would be a really, really nice fit for, there's another system called, the language is Rolling, the system is RChain, which uses, like how there's the lambda calculus, they've extended it to something called the row calculus, so that it's the actor model, and they're building their system on Scala. But I'm looking at this thinking, this would be a really nice fit for the Beam, So
I work, my company's CodeFund, but CodeFund is a part of Gitcoin, which is a part of ConsenSys. So yes. I hear all day long, I'm hearing conversations of Ethereum and the blockchain. And honestly, I don't know as much about it as I probably should, but it is interesting to see how much. So we have an internal channel, an internal Slack, and one of them is literally just how can Elixir help the blockchain. And it's kind of fun to watch that. And there's some projects that are coming up and about that are written in Elixir for blockchain. Now, you mentioned earlier that it maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Elixir can solve a lot of the issues that the blockchain is having, especially Ethereum. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So less that Elixir can, save Ethereum, because when you do an Ethereum implementation, that would be an application written in whatever language, right? But a lot of the idioms can really help. So it's a bit of a digression, but there's a number of things in the design of Ethereum that I'm not super happy with. I have a strong interest in programming language theory, compilers, and type systems, right? Correctness. So they've done made a lot of decisions for reasons of efficiency that make it very difficult to interoperate or to write proofs for your programs. And the thinking is very much similar to maybe C or Golang, somewhere in there, right? Right down to the main language solidity, right? By bringing in these concepts, so the big claim from Ethereum status codes is we can have every actor, because that's really what it is, we can have every actor on the system be interoperable automatically, right, with a set of known messages that you can pass back and forth. And thinking in this message passing style has been tremendously helpful. My work back at Vinhaven, the stuff we're doing at Robot Overlord, all of this stuff. So taking the lessons that we've learned from Elixir and bringing it in, or even down the road or on another system, how would we want to do distributed computing with messages and threads and having things be asynchronous. Another project that we're working on, we haven't announced publicly yet, but yeah, why not on a podcast? We're going to be adding message queues, mailboxes to Ethereum as well. So we're porting quite a lot. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. Breaking news. You heard it here in a week and a half.
Yeah.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean, message queues on the blockchain?
Yeah, so just like how you have mailboxes in Elixir, where you can receive messages, they end up in a first in, first out queue. And then it's the actor's job, or it's up to them to decide when to pop messages off of this queue and to handle them or to just ignore them, right? They could get a message that says, ignore the next 10 messages. And it could agree or not to agree to just burn those, right? Or flush the queue, just ignore everything that was in there, right? To give more control back in an asynchronous setting. So again, Ethereum being a one single threaded system replicated a whole bunch of times, asynchrony, nobody's really thinking about. So if you're going to, the really classic example, you want to buy, somebody has an ICO and you want to buy their token, but the ICO is not open yet. You have to keep trying, and it just keeps blowing up until the ICO is open, and now it's open. Or you could put it into a queue and say, here's my money, here's my order, and then when the queue is open, it processes your transaction, right? Or, here's an encrypted email on the system, here you go. And you don't have to write your own one every time. It can just sit in a literal mailbox, and you can pop messages off as you need them. And it's very difficult to get.
Deploy more, pay less with DigitalOcean, the simplest all-in-one cloud computing platform for developers. Scale and run cloud applications faster and more efficiently with effortless administration tools to robust compute, flexible configurations, networking services, real-time alerts, and rapid provisioning, while enjoying industry-leading price to performance with a flat pricing structure across all global data center regions at any usage volume. Spend more time building better web apps and less time worrying about managing infrastructure with DigitalOcean. Build your next app on DigitalOcean. Get started with a free $100 credit at do.co/Elixir.
Sorry, I shouldn't cut you off. The mailbox contents themselves, does that content sit on the ledger, or is that somewhere else, because you say that you blast or you clear the key or whatever. I didn't think that would be possible with an immutable ledger.
Yeah. So the immutable portion of the ledger it's an immutable data structure, just like how, say, lists are immutable on Elixir. So the history is always there, but the state is always changing. The current state, the current view. But you can go back and look at the history.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Which is, one of these really lovely things that they're bringing in from, more functional style, right? When we have these immutable data structures, we can do a lot of sharing and, multi-threading that they're not currently taking advantage of because it's this single-threaded system, right? But when talking about these systems, we can't think of it as a single, it's distributed in general and everything's immutable, right? In what way do you mean it's immutable? Which part of it, right? In what way is it distributed? There's a distribution of control to several different programs. I write a program, I stick it up there as again, I'll just make it a simple case, as an inbox for me to receive messages on. I'm going to have to run a program to check when I get a message in. I can't have that be one thing. I have to have that be many things. And I would like to have that hooked up to my UI, ideally, so that I don't have to go and do everything totally by hand. I should just open the wallet or MetaMask or whatever and have a message come out.
Man, you're a fascinating person. Wow.
Thank you.
So I was looking at robotoverlord.io. We'll have that in the show notes. That's your company. You also do Elixir and Phoenix training and consulting for people.
Yes. That is right. Yeah, we have of course, it's really designed as a 5-day, but we've done it as short as 2 for companies, and then also at a couple conferences as well. And that is zero experience with Elixir, no Erlang background. Let's get you up and running and building real stuff over the course of a couple days, and so that people can have the confidence to use Elixir in production. And it doesn't give people 100% of absolutely everything that you'll ever need. But having run this a few times now, we've done it maybe a dozen times or so, people seem to really enjoy it. And then, they also get, access to me and Jen after. They can ask questions. So, and people are always having done Elixir for a while now, it's easy to be like, well, this is just whatever, it's Elixir. I'm comfortable with it. The language is friendly, etc. But watching the light bulbs go off in people's heads as you're bringing them in from Ruby or whatever language, right? A lot of people from JavaScript is always really, really exciting. And watching their minds just melt and just poof, right? The intro exercise we do to learn everybody's name is we have a fully distributed local network shootout game where you have to know somebody else's name, and then you can fire at them, and whoever's last standing wins. But because it's running over a network and there's lag, we call it relativistic, because you can end up shooting each other. So some people both get out, and so it ends up being fun. Everybody has a copy of the scoreboard, and showing them the code after that and running through it. And it's maybe, 80 lines, because it's just a gen server, right? People get really excited. So it's always fun to do.
Well, that's awesome. And so I know you're based in, you physically live in Vancouver, right?
Yes.
And so what is the Elixir community? You said you host a functional meetup, functional programming meetup. And so is there, what's the temperature like there for Elixir? Is there a lot of interest? You said there's some Ruby people interest. Is there cross interest from other functional languages? What's that like there?
And to pile on, what are the trends looking like?
Right. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I run with a few other people the Vancouver Functional Programmers Meetup. We do quarterly talks and workshops, and then weekly Haskell reading group that I mentor at. There is also an Erlang and Elixir meetup that we were trying to run in 2015, I guess, 2015 or so. And there just wasn't quite enough of a critical mass at that time. There were a lot of people interested, but it was sort of, they would show up and be like, teach me. Well, I don't have content every month for you, maybe bring some of your learnings with you, right? So that ended up sort of fizzling out for a while. And a few people have tried to resurrect it over the years. We've started to, because it was the same people running, the Haskell meetup and the Elixir meetup. And, so we just kind of stuck them all in one big meetup. And that's been really great because now we have all of this cross-pollination between the different languages and idioms and making, getting people to see that like, oh, it's not just Elm, it's all of these other things too. Right? And there's these other ways of doing things and like, oh, well, it's not real functional programming if it's not Haskell. Well, no, it all is. And here are the principles and here's why. And people will show up for a workshop and learn about, literally on the last one, we had somebody give a 2-hour intro to Elixir, rebuilding all of the standard like command line tools like cat and, ping and all of that, which was really, really popular. We had maybe 35 people in that room, I think, something like that. Just not bad. Yeah. In terms of actual adoption in Vancouver, for several years, because we were trying to be like the Elixir people in town, right? Robot Overlord. And it was a hard sell for a while there like, oh, well, we're already doing Rails. They just introduced, I can't remember the name of it, but the asynchronous one that you can plug in Sidekick or whatever. So they introduced that feature. Do we really need Elixir? The team's already familiar with Rails, right? So that was a tough sell, but teams were interested. So we had a few companies, interested in having us come and talk about it and train the team a little bit. In the last maybe 10 months or so, suddenly it's, hey, can we have a coffee? We're building an Elixir team. And for some reason, usually alongside blockchain stuff. And I think that's just because there's enough money in it. They're trying to attract people that are interested in more cutting edge technologies. A lot of them are interested in Elixir. They're looking at a new way of doing things. So there's quite a few, actually, just not even a block down the street. There's building a block explorer in Elixir and business analytics tools, and that's a Phoenix project. And then there's even some of the larger companies in town have been looking at do we do this in Rails or do we do this in Phoenix? And well, the rest of the company's already built in on Ruby, so why have this, boundary? And sometimes that's the right call, right? Greenfield projects, honestly, and I tell this to people all the time, is there any reason to not build something in Elixir versus Ruby? The answer is no. You should probably build it in Elixir. You're going to be happier with it in the long run. It'll scale better, right? And yeah, there isn't a gem for that. There isn't a package for everything. But then you get to be the person who writes the package and get all the, the experience that comes with that. And then you can say, oh, look, we put it on our website. We've got we built whatever the thing was, right? It's not an ecosystem that's 20 years old, right? It's not the JVM. It's not, but we have all the battle-hardened stuff from Erlang, which is great, right? And all of the tools and training. We had, at the beginning of this year, Robert Verdig came into town and gave a talk at the FP Meetup. And he was in town giving training to one of the local gaming studios, right? So there are lots of people doing things on the beam. In terms of trends for functional programming languages generally, a few years ago, again, around the same time, I would say, 2014, 2015, even earlier than that, 2011 to 2015, it really felt like Clojure was going to take off in a big way. And then around that same time, 2015-ish, really felt like there was so much excitement with Elixir, and then Go happened and kind of deflated, the excitement a little bit, and all these people flocked to Go because it felt very familiar. And fine, a lot of it is matter of taste and aesthetics and whatnot. I've done production work in Go, and I have to say I'm not really a huge fan at scale because they end up pushing so much of the complexity. You have to put complexity somewhere. They've pushed all the complexity up into architecture, which is really hard to get right, which is the exact opposite of what Elixir does. They say, here's your architecture, here's Gen Server, right?
I was fascinated to hear how you would react to Go, given that you explicitly wrote an error handling library for Elixir.
Yeah.
So I had my assumptions.
Yeah. Like in some ways they're trying to solve the same problems. Obviously, Go has a much stronger emphasis on performance and compile times, right? But for the most part, the emphasis is on Go routines, and you can do this sort of distributed programming stuff, and it'll kind of it'll work and it'll solve your problems, and it'll be much easier than doing this in C. Great, yes, but they've taken fully opposite approaches, and I think that's one of the reasons where again Elixir really shines in teams that don't have a highly centralized, highly specialized architect where everybody needs to contribute and just get stuff done. The tools are sort of provided for you already in Elixir, which is really nice. And it's friendly, and there's a good community, and all these things. Now, this isn't to say that Go is the worst language ever, and a lot of the plans for Go 2.0 look really interesting. They're finally getting generics, hooray! But obviously there are people that are being very productive on Go. But from what I've seen, and even teams who've come from Go and are moving into Elixir, it's just such a nice experience in Elixir that everything just sort of works. All of the libraries kind of integrate really nicely. There's a style and a flavor to it that's very, friendly, I guess. But you then get the friendliness with all of this power and 30 years of, learnings in distributed computing. That's, not that the average Elixir project uses that much distributed computing, but still you can scale up very, very easily from a single node into many, and the world doesn't fall apart. So that is my ramble on Go.
So I am curious, you've also had a lot of Haskell experience, right? Where you have a very strong type systems. And I know, so what is your feeling then on Elixir and the Elixir type system, which is, there's pattern matching, and there's guard clauses, but it's not really the type system. So I'm just kind of curious as to where you think Elixir could go or should go, or just kind of what your thoughts are there on that.
And yet another pylon, also Dialyxir thoughts.
Yes. So I guess we'll start with Dialyxir a little bit. Or actually, I'll go even one step further back just to clarify. Something that I get asked both at the FP Meetup and at the workshops. So type system, especially for people who have a background in Haskell or Elm, they end up conflating pattern matching and destructuring with types. So the types live at a different level from your code. And even if you have a quote unquote sum type where you have a number of different enumerations, those aren't the type, those are data. And then you have a type that describes them, right? So types really, at the end of the day, they're about static analysis. They're about knowing something, guaranteeing an invariant about your program, something that will always hold true at compile time before you run your program. Right? Dialyxir, I think, does a really beautiful job of this in a lot of ways. It checks for exhaustive cases, and it does some type checking, and you can annotate your functions. You can lie to it a little bit. I've ended up in situations where I was able to lie to Dialyxir pretty effectively, right? Because it's not as not everything is typed. You can type things as any. There are subtypes as well. So you can add together automatically an int and a float, and it's not going to complain. It'll just work. And one of them is a subtype of another, right? They kind of fit inside each other. You can create, if you have some structs, you can create a union of them, with a pipe with a bar on it, and just say, this is going to be one of these 50 things. Which of those 50 things? I'm not going to tell you, right? And so you kind of weaken the system a little bit, as opposed to forcing a tag onto so when you do that with the bar, it's called a variant. When you have an untagged variant. So when you add tags to it, you're saying, here's another type. I have all of these special tags. Let's say this is case A, B, and C, and I'm going to fit my, the inner wrapped ones inside each of these. So you have some data describing what you're actually doing, which gives you kind of a stronger sense as the programmer of what you're doing. And we currently don't really have that unless you decide to wrap things in tuple with a special atom on it, which is not totally my favorite pattern, or inside of a struct, which now you've created, a struct, which is not that heavyweight, but there's a little bit there. So Dialyxir overall is pretty nice. And it gets the job done for what Elixir needs it to do. There was some talk a few years ago, last year, I guess, about adding a type system in the similar vein to like TypeScript or Flow to Elixir. And I kind of played around with it for a while. I had a partial implementation, and it's entirely possible because, again, it's a description, right? It's possible, but you run into a lot of the same things that you run into in JavaScript, where the existing ecosystem isn't built for it. You have a lot of things that happen dynamically off of strings, getting turned into atoms, or things happening in natively implemented functions. So you don't even know if it's safe to run because there could be, a runtime error in C, and there's no way of knowing about that ahead of time, really. You could encode it in the type yourself. And it's, again, it's possible, but the overhead for the programmer ends up being really, really high. So if we're worried about static analysis, right, which is, again, really the point in a type system, and knowing about invariance, there's many ways of achieving this. So we already have a type system with Dialyxir that really does honestly a pretty good job for what we need it to do. Why don't we add things like what I was doing in type class, add property checks at compile time to ensure that you know how this thing will behave when it runs, right? And thinking in terms of invariance, that I know that this will always work this way under all circumstances. This is the real power behind things like, enum.map. I know that I'll always get back the same data structure. It's not going to change the structure. It'll only change the values inside of it, right? And that's one invariant that we know will hold. If you write an enumerable instance that doesn't do that, it'll let you, but the behavior will be surprising, right? So having, using some of these other techniques, and not just in tests, but integrating them more into the core workflow, and letting the compiler help you out with this stuff, I think is really, really important, even more than the type system.
Hi, this is Charles Max Wood, and I've been asked more times than I can count, how do I stay current? There's a lot to this question, and I'm working on a solution: code badges. That's right. You heard me right. Basically, the idea is that you come and do a code badge, and that gets you an introduction to a topic. Then you can decide if you want to pursue it further. But while working on the badge, you gain enough proficiency to be able to pick it up again if you need. A lot of technology comes through on the bleeding edge, and not all of it sticks, but the principles do. So doing badges on the technologies that will get you ahead will provide you with experience needed to stay competitive. Plus, it offers social proof that you know something about the topic. The project is on Kickstarter right now. You can support it and get on the launch list at codebadge.org.
Yeah, I have not been able to find a way to do Dialyxir-driven development. I've tried a few times. I really want it to feel like writing Elm, where the compiler's just like, hey, you're an idiot, but this is exactly how. And then I fix it.
Yeah.
But instead, it just tells me no local return, and I cry.
Yeah. Have you seen Alpaca?
I have seen Alpaca. I have not played with it.
Okay. I'm pretty sure it's hit 1.0 by now. So it's an ML, so a Elm or Haskell-like language that runs on the beam. And it has exactly this style of type system. And you can do type-driven development, which is really great. But then, your Alpaca programs feel very much like Alpaca programs. They don't feel as much like Elixir programs. It's also really hard to do this type system stuff when you're on a distributed system, right? And especially when you don't know what's happening, when there's some part of it that's a black box, right? That may be untyped.
Yeah, I've set out to read session type papers and not finished them at least 3 times.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's not exactly light reading. This is one of the reasons that from earlier in the conversation when I brought up RChain and Rolang, that I really like about their approach is that I don't think that the system is typed per se, but they've described an actor model with a well thought out formalism that works, that you can then write down ahead of time, this is how this thing will work, and then it actually does that. And some more work going into that for Elixir would be great,
So I do have to ask, since we've chatted about blockchain quite a bit, have you looked at Tezos or seen Tezos?
Looked at Tezos a couple of years ago. Definitely liked what I saw for sure. Haven't kept up with them as much in the interim, but it's one of these systems where they're trying to do it right, quote unquote, do it right. Build it in a way that's more scalable than something like Ethereum, scalable at the application layer, right? And it's really nice to see a lot of these approaches. I unfortunately think that we're probably, at least at minimum the next few years, are going to be in a situation with, first mover has won, right? So it's going to be Bitcoin and Ethereum. There is some talk about having a chain of chains or some interoperability layer that the status codes I'm working on may or may not help with. At which point it becomes more practical to use something like Tezos or RChain or one of these approaches, Tangle, etc. What do you think about Tezos?
I am extremely excited about it. Generally, I like the idea. So, I like the fact that it has as a focus, solving problems like we had with the DAO, as opposed to just pretending we'll write software right, even though we've proven we never will. Which is kind of how I feel, where I feel Ethereum stands. So, I feel like it is always going to be C, which is great. Some people can write things that succeed, but I really want some properties to hold true about programs, and I don't feel like we'll really ever get there. I could be wrong.
Yeah. So again, this is a total digression from probably the main topic. So at the application layer, right? Because again, I have an interest in languages and type systems. One of my projects on the back burner is having an Idris-like language, so a dependently typed language that will run on at least Ethereum, if not cross-blockchain. Somebody's done a master's thesis proof of concept on this a few years ago. That's actually very, very impressive, the Vindaloo thesis. And you can, at the language level, get yourself enough invariance that a lot of the problems that we worry about go away for the application. Maybe not the platform, but at the application layer, you can get a lot of the properties that you want out of it, and then let it compile down to whatever. Because at the end of the day, pretty much everything ends up going through a C compiler at some point, right? We get zeros and ones out the other end. So if we can guarantee things, at much higher up in the stack. This was my primary work at FinHaven. We were building a declarative language, something like Prolog, for financial transactions that would constrain you so that you couldn't write a program that would let you withdraw more than you wanted to for a time period, let's say, right? And it would fail at compile time. You couldn't even deploy it. Right. So it's possible, but for the application layer. But I agree, there's some very, very nice properties in things like Tezos and these other systems. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that we can get those invariants pushed down the stack a lot closer to the actual running stuff.
Yeah, when they're enforced for everyone, not just whoever's using your choice of tools, that's ideal. And same goes for Elixir, right? You don't have to run Dialyxir, right?
And in fact, many people write types and do not.
Yep.
Wrong types that blow up Dialyxir when you use the library.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, I was just going to say that was my tangent. I suppose we should wrap that one up.
yeah. See, I'm still learning Elixir, and so a lot of this was way beyond what I'm really familiar with. But it's interesting to see where we're going with a lot of this stuff. So, anyway, let's go ahead and do some picks. Mark, do you want to start us off with picks?
Sure. One of the things I was just going to mention as a pick is, it's not a technical one. It's more around something I do in my workspace environment. So I have this little symbol. It's a Japanese characters for Kaizen, and I have those. They sit by my desk, and so Kaizen is it. It turned into a whole movement around manufacturing, but what it really means is change for the better. It's the two symbols, change and for the better, meaning improvement. And I just look at it every day, and it helps me remember I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be a perfect Elixir developer. I don't have to be a perfect manager. I don't have to be anything perfect. I can just try to do a little bit better today than I did yesterday. And I think that's for me, it's just a helpful mindset to say that it's okay to just not be perfect, right? But I can do something better than I did yesterday, and that's it's empowering for me. So I'm not saying anyone else has to adopt Kaizen principle or philosophy, but there's something in your life perhaps where you're like, hey, there's this mantra or this phrase or something that has some significance, like print it out, put it somewhere in your workspace where you remember it, you see it, and it brings you back to say, yes, I value this. This is something that I want to focus on. So that's my pick.
I just want to pile on the idea of Kaizen. I mean, I've over the last little while, I felt a little bit overwhelmed with all of the stuff on my list. And yeah, that's the way I've managed a lot of that, was just, make some incremental step forward, right? Change one small thing better. And, so I do that on my yard because that's a project I'm working on. I do that in the business around the podcasts and, with my family and yeah. And then it's not so overwhelming because at least I'm on it.
Right. That's it.
Awesome. Josh, do you have some picks for us? Josh, are you still on mute?
I am, but that didn't mean that I wasn't talking. Sorry about that. So yeah, I have exactly one pick. It's an article called Value-Oriented Programming. It's kind of natural to follow this style in Elixir, but you can always do it better. Basically, it boils down to, hey, you should be producing values. That's perhaps a bad summary of it. But I used sort of the model recently for a reporting layer I was writing, and where previously I might have produced a specific report. Instead, I have a thing that produces a report struct. Really, really trivial example, but in this case, it was really valuable because I have sort of 3 different representations for it. And then all I had to do was write a renderer, and it's much easier to write the tests. So just give it a read. It's really easy to sort of implement that sort of thing, and I think your code will be better.
Awesome. Eric, what are your picks?
I'll start off with one. The one that I picked today is it's an Ethereum library, since we're on the topic of Ethereum. It's a GraphQL interface for Ethereum called ETHQL. It's pretty cool. So if you want to access the Ethereum blockchain data via GraphQL, this library makes it possible. And I thought I had another one. I do multiple picks on 2 different podcasts every Tuesday, so I kind of forget what I have and have not picked. But I'll throw out my old faithful, Metabase. Go to metabase.com. It's worth learning. It's worth understanding. It is a solid application. These guys are my heroes.
Awesome. I'm going to throw some picks in, and then we'll get some picks from Brooklyn. So one pick that I have, this is something that I've kind of been fiddling with for a little while, or for the last week or so, is Terra Genesis. It's an iPhone game. I think it's also on Android. But you wind up terraforming planets. And so you start with Mars and then Venus. Anyway, it was pretty fun. So I'm going to pick that. One other thing that I'm going to pick related to the relentless improvement kind of idea is honest feedback. And I got some honest feedback. I don't know if I should call Eric out, but I got some honest feedback from him a little earlier today. And I think you could tell that some of it wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear. But that's honestly the only way that you get better. And, the thing that really frustrated me, I think, more than anything else, was that I didn't get that honest feedback from some of the people that were, it was kind of secondhand feedback. And, but at the same time, it's okay. Let me think about this and let me figure out how to get better. And if we're not doing that, then we're going to miss some major opportunities for growth. So I really just want to call that out and just say, hey, look, hopefully we're challenging the way you think, and you can go and pick that up and say, okay, what can I change? What can I do better? What can I make better? Even just a little bit. And anyway, the last pick that I have, so I actually started playing with Phoenix. I've kind of played with Elixir a little bit, but I decided, you know what, I'm doing the show. I want to be able to participate a little bit more fully, so I started building a Phoenix app. And I have to say the HexDocs stuff is awesome. It's been really helpful just to be able to go look stuff up and see how that works and figure out, okay, this is like what I'm used to. This is not like what I'm used to. This is how this works. And anyway, so those are my picks. Brooklyn, what are your picks?
So I have one pick that kind of ties into a few of them here, especially Kaizen and all the self-improvement stuff. Wabi-sabi is another concept that is seeing the beauty in things that are imperfect or impermanent, where they'll take, as an example, you take a bowl and have it broken, dropped, shattered, and you put it together with, say gold in the cracks, and it ends up this very beautiful sort of organic thing. And bringing that into, programming or life in general, it's very easy to get trapped in perfectionism. This thing has to be just right all the time. And I'm very much a perfectionist, right? Seeing that, okay, the system is going to need to grow, and there might be, this thing isn't totally figured out yet, and that's okay, because we're going to see how it develops over time. I mean, still build it in a way that it, that it's resilient, but, this will grow. Or, oh, there's this code that I wrote 3 weeks ago and I just Git blamed myself, and that was maybe not the right choice at that time. Well, it's all good. It's all impermanent. We can go through it back and change it. Yeah.
That is so much more true with code than it is like physical things, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which I'm grateful for. We can fix it.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I had that conversation. My my father-in-law's a general contractor, and it was like, the nice thing about when I build things is when I screw it up, I can just wipe it out and make another one. But yeah, he's doing physical stuff. So if he breaks it, then he has to tear it out and rebuild it. So, all right. Well, Brooklyn, if people want to find you online, where do they go?
So I'm on Twitter as Xpede, EXPEDE. I'm Xpede basically everywhere, GitHub, Twitter, Medium, etc. Or send me an email at hello@brooklynzelenka.com or drop by robotoverlord.io.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming.
Great. Thank you for having me.
That was fun. All right. Well, we'll wrap this up and we will catch everyone next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.